I thought I found love online, but my first date turned into a comedy of errors when she revealed she has 5 kids by 3 different dads. I was on a first date with a woman who said she was 32 that I met on an online dating site. I met her at the restaurant, and the first thing that I noticed was she looked very little like her pictures. I wouldn't call it a catfish, but she did wonders with her angles, choices, and usages of filters to present herself as best as possible in her profile. The deception instantly turned me off, but I decide to proceed with the date anyways. After our drinks arrive, but before our food arrives, while getting to know each other, she tells me she has 5 kids. I know from our brief online interaction that she has never been married, so I pretty bluntly ask if they all have the same father, and she says no. She doesn't say how many baby daddies she has unprompted, so I bluntly ask, with how many men? And she seemed embarrassed to answer, then says 3. My response was, wow, and we both sat there in silence for about 30 seconds as I desperately tried to not burst out into laughter. I'm not sure why I found the situation so funny. Maybe it was a nervous tic. I tell her, I don't see this going anywhere. Leave enough money on the table for my drink and the food I ordered and walk out without any further conversation. I wanted to say you should disclose you have 5 kids with 3 different men on your profile to prevent from wasting people's time, but I didn't want to add insult to injury knowing I was about to walk out of, and I suppose I could have asked before meeting her. Update 1. After taking some time to think, I've realized that there's more going on in my marriage than I initially thought. The trip to my home country was supposed to bring us closer, but it seems to have uncovered deeper issues. Since returning from the trip, my husband's behavior has only gotten worse. I thought it was just a cultural misunderstanding at first, something we could talk through and resolve, but I've come to realize that this goes beyond cultural insensitivity. For the past few weeks, my husband has been acting distant, almost like he's completely checked out of the marriage. He spends more time with his friends and at work, barely coming home unless it's to sleep. When I try to talk to him about what happened during the trip, he dismisses it entirely, saying that I'm overreacting and that I need to get over it. His attitude has become even more cold and indifferent. I can't remember the last time we had a meaningful conversation, let alone spent time together doing something as a couple. It's gotten to the point where I've started questioning our entire relationship. I look back on the years we've been together and wonder if I missed the signs. Were there always red flags that I ignored because I was too focused on making things work? I've spent so much time trying to understand his point of view, trying to be patient, and give him the benefit of the doubt. But at this point, I feel like I'm the only one fighting for this marriage. A few days ago, we had another argument. I was cooking dinner, and he came home from work, barely said a word to me, and went straight to the living room to watch TV. I tried to engage him in conversation, asking how his day was and if he wanted to talk, but he just grunted in response. Frustrated, I asked him why he was being so distant, and that's when everything came out. He told me that he didn't feel connected to me anymore, that the trip to my home country made him realize how different we really are. He said he felt out of place the entire time we were there, that he couldn't relate to my family or the culture, and that it made him feel uncomfortable. When I pointed out that my family went out of their way to make him feel welcome, he just shrugged and said it didn't matter. He admitted that he had been avoiding talking about the trip, because he didn't want to hurt my feelings, but at the same time, he didn't think it was fair for me to expect him to enjoy something he wasn't comfortable with. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just that he didn't like the trip, it was that he didn't like a fundamental part of who I am. My culture, my family, everything that makes me who I am. He saw it as something foreign and uncomfortable, something he couldn't connect with. And instead of trying to understand or appreciate it, he just shut down and distanced himself from me. I told him how much his words hurt me, how I felt like he was rejecting not just my family, but a huge part of my identity. His response? I didn't marry your family, I married you. He said he didn't understand why I was making such a big deal out of it, that he loved me and that should be enough. But the thing is, it's not enough. Loving me means loving all of me, including my culture and my family. It means making an effort to understand and appreciate the things that are important to me, even if they're outside of his comfort zone. After that argument, I realized that I can't keep pretending everything is okay. I've been trying to convince myself that this is just a rough patch, that we can work through it. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that this isn't something that can be fixed with a simple conversation. This is a fundamental difference in values and priorities, and I don't know if it's something we can overcome. The hardest part is that I still love him. I love the man I married, the man who made me laugh and supported me through some of the toughest times in my life. But I don't know if that man still exists. The person he's become over the past few months is someone I barely recognize. He's cold, distant, and indifferent to my feelings. And I can't keep sacrificing my own happiness and well-being just to hold on to the memory of who he used to be. I've been talking to my friends and family about what's been going on, and they've all been incredibly supportive. My parents, in particular, have been amazing. They haven't said anything bad about my husband, but I can tell they're hurt by the way he's treated them. My mom even asked me if she did something wrong during the trip, which broke my heart because she was nothing but kind and welcoming the entire time. I assured her that it wasn't her fault, that the issues were between me and my husband, but I can tell she's still worried. At this point, I'm seriously considering separation. I haven't made any final decisions yet, but I've started looking into the logistics of what that would look like. We don't have any kids, so it wouldn't be a messy divorce, but the thought of ending our marriage is still incredibly painful. I never imagined we'd get to this point, but I also never imagined I'd be married to someone who couldn't accept such an important part of who I am. In the meantime, I've decided to take some space for myself. I've been staying with a close friend for the past few days, and it's given me some much-needed clarity. Being away from the constant tension at home has allowed me to think more clearly about what I want and need in a relationship. I'm not ready to throw in the towel just yet, but I also know that I can't continue living like this. Something has to change, and if my husband isn't willing to put in the effort to meet me halfway, then I'll have to make the difficult decision to walk away. I plan on talking to him again soon, once I feel more grounded in my decision. I want to give him the opportunity to show that he's willing to work on things, but I'm also prepared for the possibility that he won't. At the end of the day, I deserve to be with someone who values all parts of me, not just the parts that are convenient or easy to understand. I'll update again once I've had that conversation and figured out what my next steps will be. Right now, I'm focusing on taking care of myself and finding the strength to make the best decision for my future. Update 2. It's been a few weeks since I last updated, and things have shifted in a way I didn't expect. After my last post, I had decided to take some time for myself and really think about what I wanted from this marriage, but something happened that forced me to confront things sooner than I had planned. About a week ago, my husband came home from work unusually early. He sat me down and said we needed to talk. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I definitely didn't see this coming. He told me that he had been thinking about our marriage too, and that he felt like things between us weren't working. He said that he didn't feel the same way about me anymore, and that he thought it was time for us to consider separating. I was stunned. Not because I hadn't thought about it myself, but because I never expected him to be the one to bring it up. I had assumed that I would have to be the one to make the difficult decision, and hearing him say the words out loud made everything feel so much more real. At first, I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to fight for our marriage, to try and work things out, but the other part of me knew that this was the right decision. We had grown apart in ways that I hadn't fully realized until that moment, and I couldn't deny that we were on completely different paths. We talked for hours that night. He admitted that he had been feeling disconnected from me for a long time, but he didn't know how to express it. He said he didn't want to hurt me, but he also didn't want to continue pretending like everything was fine when it wasn't. He apologized for the way he had handled things during and after our trip, and for how dismissive he had been of my feelings. But even with that apology, He made it clear that he didn't think we were meant to be together anymore. I asked him if there was someone else, half expecting him to deny it, but his silence said it all. He eventually admitted that there was someone he had been talking to, someone from work. He swore that nothing physical had happened, but he had developed feelings for her and wasn't sure what to do about it. My heart sank when he said that. Even though I knew things between us hadn't been right for a while, hearing that he had already started emotionally moving on was a punch in the gut. We both sat in silence for a while, neither of us knowing what to say next. It was like we were both waiting for the other person to make the first move, to decide what the next step would be. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spoke. I told him that if he had already checked out of the marriage emotionally, there was no point in trying to salvage it. I didn't want to be in a relationship where I had to compete for his attention, and I certainly didn't want to be with someone who had feelings for someone else. The rest of that conversation was a blur. We agreed to start the process of separating, but there was still so much left unsaid. I didn't ask for details about the woman from his work because, honestly, I didn't want to know. The last thing I needed was to torture myself with thoughts of him and her. It was enough to know that his heart wasn't in our marriage anymore. Since that conversation, things have been awkward, to say the least. We're still living in the same house for now, trying to figure out the logistics of separating, but it's been incredibly tense. We've been sleeping in separate rooms, barely speaking to each other, and the few times we have interacted, it's been strained and uncomfortable. It's like we're both walking on eggshells, trying to avoid making things worse, but also knowing that we're on borrowed time. In the midst of all this, I've been leaning heavily on my friends and family for support. I haven't told my parents everything yet because I know they would be heartbroken, but I did confide in a few close friends, and they've been incredible. They've reminded me that I'm stronger than I think, and that I deserve to be with someone who values and respects me fully. That's been hard to hear because, for so long, I thought my husband was that person. But now, I'm starting to realize that maybe I was wrong about him all along. One of the hardest things about this whole situation is grappling with the cultural aspect of it. In my culture, marriage is seen as something sacred, something you fight for, no matter how difficult things get. Divorce is often seen as a last resort, something to be avoided at all costs. And while I know that staying in a toxic marriage isn't healthy, there's still a part of me that feels like I'm letting my family down by not fighting harder to make this work. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that fighting for this marriage would mean sacrificing parts of myself that I'm not willing to give up. I've already compromised so much of my identity to fit into my husband's world, and I can't do that anymore. I need to reclaim my sense of self, my culture, and my values, even if that means walking away from this relationship. As for my husband, I think he's starting to realize the gravity of what's happening. He's been more subdued lately, almost as if he's coming to terms with the fact that our marriage is really ending. I don't think he expected things to unravel this quickly, and I can tell he's struggling with the reality of it all. But at the same time, he hasn't made any effort to fight for our marriage either, which tells me that he's ready to move on, even if he's not fully admitting it to himself yet. We haven't told anyone outside of our immediate circle about the separation yet, and I'm dreading having to explain it to our families. I know my parents will be devastated, and I have no idea how his family will react. Part of me wonders if his parents will even care, given how dismissive they've been of me and my culture in the past. But regardless of how they react, I know I have to stay strong and focus on what's best for me. At this point, I'm just taking things one day at a time. The idea of starting over is terrifying, but staying in a marriage where I'm not valued or respected is even scarier. I'm slowly coming to terms with the fact that this chapter of my life is ending, and while it's painful, I know it's for the best. I'll update again once we've figured out the logistics of the separation and how we're going to move forward from here. For now, I'm focusing on healing and finding my way back to myself. Update 3. It has been a few weeks since my last update, and I have finally found the courage to take some definitive steps regarding my marriage. I've been doing a lot of soul-searching and self-reflection during this time. I had to confront the reality that I deserve a partner who respects my culture, my family, and most importantly, my feelings. After my previous updates, I took the advice I received from many of you about seeking clarity and truly assessing what I want for my future. I realized I was not just dealing with a cultural misunderstanding or a few insensitive comments. I was in a relationship with someone who consistently dismissed my feelings and belittled the very essence of who I am. That realization was hard to accept, but it was necessary. In the days that followed my last update, I decided to confront my husband again. I knew this conversation had to be different from the previous ones. I wanted to approach it from a place of calm, but I also needed to be firm about my boundaries. I called him and asked if we could meet at a neutral location, somewhere we could have an open and honest conversation without the distractions of home. He reluctantly agreed, which was a sign that he was starting to understand how serious this was for me. We met at a coffee shop, and the atmosphere was tense from the moment I arrived. I could feel the weight of everything unsaid between us. As we sat down, I took a deep breath and began to speak. I started by expressing how much I appreciated the good times we had shared, the laughter, and the love we built together. But I also made it clear that those memories did not outweigh the pain I had been feeling because of his insensitivity toward my family and culture. As I spoke, I could see the walls come up. He started to get defensive, claiming that I was being overly dramatic and that he didn't mean anything by his comments. I interrupted him, insisting that his words were not just careless, but deeply hurtful. I told him I felt like I had been compromising my identity to fit into a mold he had created for our relationship. This was not who I wanted to be, nor was it how I wanted to feel in a marriage. To my surprise, he seemed to listen more than he had before, but it didn't take long for him to shift back into his old patterns. He started to minimize my experiences again, suggesting that I was making a big deal out of nothing. I was frustrated, but I had anticipated this response. I pressed on, explaining that it wasn't just about him being dismissive. It was about a lack of respect for my culture and my family. That's when the conversation took an unexpected turn. He claimed that his feelings about my culture stemmed from his upbringing. He explained that his parents had always been critical of anything outside their own experience, and that he had internalized those views without even realizing it. While I was surprised by his honesty, I also felt a mixture of pity and anger. It was not my job to unpack his trauma or change his perspective, especially when I was the one feeling hurt. After he shared his thoughts, I felt a flicker of hope. I believed we could work through this, that maybe understanding could lead to change. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized that hope was misplaced. He wasn't ready to confront his own biases or to truly respect the cultural differences that made our relationship unique. Instead, he seemed more interested in maintaining the status quo. Feeling overwhelmed, I decided to put everything on the table. I told him that I had been contemplating separation, and I needed to know if he was willing to commit to real change. His reaction was immediate, and it shocked me. He became defensive again, accusing me of throwing away our relationship over a few comments. I felt my heart sink. This was not a few comments. This was a pattern of behavior that had been hurting me for a long time. The conversation spiraled into a heated argument, with us both raising our voices. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't want to cry in front of him. I took a deep breath and said that I couldn't continue living like this. I told him I needed to prioritize my mental health and my well-being, and that meant considering what a future would look like if I stayed in a relationship that felt so toxic. In a moment of clarity, I realized I had been waiting for him to change, to see things from my perspective. I had held on to the hope that love could bridge our differences, but I was slowly beginning to understand that love alone was not enough. He needed to meet me halfway, and until he was willing to put in the effort, I had to think about my own happiness. After what felt like an eternity, I finally stood up and told him I was leaving. His expression was a mix of anger and disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend that I was serious. I walked out of the coffee shop, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It was scary to take that step, but it felt like the first time I was truly prioritizing myself. In the days that followed, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. I moved back in with my parents for a while, and it was comforting to be in an environment filled with love and understanding. They welcomed me back with open arms, and my mother made sure to fill the house with the delicious aromas of our traditional dishes. I realized how much I had missed that feeling of belonging, that sense of being accepted for who I am without any judgments or misunderstandings. I also reached out to a divorce lawyer to understand my options. This step was incredibly daunting, but I knew I had to be prepared. The idea of legal separation and the potential end of my marriage was terrifying, but deep down, I knew it was necessary for my well-being. The lawyer was supportive and understanding, helping me navigate the process and what it would mean moving forward. As I focus on healing and rebuilding, I also want to thank everyone who commented on my previous updates. Your support and kind words have meant the world to me. It is comforting to know I'm not alone in this journey and that so many of you understand the importance of valuing our identities and cultures in our relationships. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time, focusing on self-care, reconnecting with friends and family, and rediscovering who I am outside of this marriage. I know the road ahead will be challenging, but I feel stronger than I have in a long time. I'll keep you all updated on my journey, and thank you for being a part of it.